we're going to be having a video game-based history lesson. And there's no history I love better than Sega's. I mean, I'm a Nintendo fanboy and a Square fan, you know, in the core as a child with that nostalgia factor going. But as a man, I love the Sega story. You can make movies about every console release. I'm serious, if you've ever read the history of Sega, it is fraught with all kinds of crazy turmoil and passionate people, huge egos, butting heads. Seriously, they could have a Sega Genesis show on Netflix and it would be just as good as House of Cards or whatever you want to. Anyway, so let's get down to this history lesson. Anyone that has spent a significant amount of time talking video games with me definitely knows about my love for the Puyo series. So, before we can get to the Sega part, I gotta give you a bit of a history lesson on the Puyo series itself. A small company from Japan called Compile had the good fortune of coming up with the Puyo series and created one of the funnest block-dropping puzzle games ever created. Unfortunately, Compile went bankrupt around 1998 and sold the license to Puyo to Sega at that time. But even though Sega owned the rights to the game, Compile was actually able to continue having the rights to develop the game and release 2 more Puyo Pop games published by Sega, and of course were Japan only. But after that agreement finally ended, they handed the reins of the Puyo series over to a development team at Sega. So around 2004, that's when Sega decides to create their own version of the Puyo series. Puyo came out in the US as 2 games, Dr. Robotnik's Bean Machine, and the one I played, Kirby's Avalanche. I was foolish enough to believe that this was an actual Kirby game, and I brought it home, and I was like, what is a puzzle game? And it looks really cheap. You can tell that Banpresto/Compile put this game together without any help from HAL or anyone that ever worked on a Kirby game, because the animation was terrible. But somehow, despite that, the magic and the color and the wonder of the original Puyo series was able to shine through this disturbing skin of Kirby that it was wearing on its face like some sort of video game Hannibal Lecter. And little did I know that some 10 years after I will play Kirby's Avalanche, I will get an explosively colorful new iteration of the game. And guess what Sega development team created it? None other than Sonic Team itself. And this was Sonic Team in 2004, led by Yuji Naka, and they handed the reins of Puyo to him. This new Sega developed iteration of Puyo, called Puyo Puyo Fever, Puyo Pop Fever in America, was released on the Sega Dreamcast in Japan in 2004, right at the tail end of the Dreamcast's dying breaths. But I had the pleasure of playing it in 2005 when Atlus released the game for the Nintendo DS. Now, Sega cared so little about the series that they didn't even release it on the DS themselves. Atlus had to do it. Although Sega did release a version of the game on the GameCube, there have been plenty of Puyo games since 2005. I've imported a few of them. I have to import them because they don't come out in America. Now, unlike the incredibly niche audience the game has garnered in the West, Japan has celebrated both 15th and 20th anniversary editions of this series, with robust new outings with tons of characters, both classic and new. And recently, Japan even received a fusion of Puyo Puyo Fever plus Tetris all in one strange, colorful package. I'm still waiting for prices to drop a tad before I import this one. I mean, why a floundering Sega refuses to port a ready-made puzzle game to the US market is impossible to fathom. You can just translate the dialogue, release it on smartphones or the DS or the Vita even, and it's free money because the game's already made. Even though Puyo does have a storyline, I mean, it's still a puzzle game. This isn't Knights of the Old Republic, man. It's just a puzzle game. Just translate it and release it. And let me pay you $5, $10, $15, $40. I don't care. Despite the fact that tons of puzzle games make great bank on smartphones or even as downloadable games on home consoles and the Nintendo 3DS, unfortunately the movie-worthy incompetence of Sega has just failed to let it happen. Like, when I said Sega is like a movie or an intense TV series like The Wire, I'm not kidding. Like, even to this day, Sega's going bankrupt and Sonic games are still crappy. All their best developers have become independent or went to other studios. You can make a reality TV series about the Sega Corporation. Well, as the Dreamcast slowly faded away, and with it the dreams of many gamers who fell in love with Dreamcast-era Sega games like Jet Grind Radio, Choo Choo Rocket, and Space Channel 5, I think that the final game to escape from that era was Sega's Puyo reimagining, Puyo Pop Fever. The bright and colorful cast of the series fits in right next to the protagonist of the aforementioned game. And to drive the point home about this being the end of an era, the Dreamcast release of Puyo Pop Fever was also the final Dreamcast game developed by Sonic Team. Now I know that makes you want to pour a little out for the Dreamcast. As the Dreamcast slowly faded into the realm of retro and classic consoles, Puyo Pop Fever found itself ported to pretty much every system available in Japan. But out of the dozen systems that it went to, only the GameCube and DS versions were able to escape into Western territories. I wonder if this game had come out maybe 3 years earlier, when the Dreamcast still had a hell of a fighting chance, I believe it would have found a niche audience on the same level as Dreamcast classics like Space Channel 5 and Jet Set Radio. Unfortunately, that never took place, and Sega has just never found it feasible or appropriate or smart enough to release the game in the West.